Hey, welcome to episode 6 of the Learning React in 2021 series. This video is going to be about hooks and specifically about the useState hook, so we can understand how with functional components we can actually access state and what state is. So if you want to follow along, the link down in the description points to the GitHub repo for this series. The starter code for this episode is going to be the episode 5 branch, and the episode 6 branch is going to be the finished code for this episode. So I've already started my server, my dev server. It's up and running, so I've got that in the browser. And here we have the state of the application from the end of the last video, which was we had created the search bar component. The search bar component had listeners for different events: on focus, input, click, and submit. And then we had a function for each one of those. Now, they weren't doing anything. They were just console logging messages, but we have that available to us now. So what I want to do is inside of here, as the person fills this out, when they submit the form, I'm going to write a little message here saying that, this was what they last searched for. So it's there as a reference on the page. So we'll start with that, and then we'll get a little bit more complex after that. Okay, inside of React components, in the old version with class-based components, which still exist, still work, you had a variable, a property inside the component, this.state. That was an object or a primitive value that was sort of bound to the component, and every time you updated that value, React knew that it could re-render. So whatever your content for the component was, it would re-render that if there was something inside of there using state. So if I had state as the value, the label on my button, it would re-render if I changed that value. Now, here with functional components, we don't have access to this.state anymore, but we do have hooks which allow us to tie into it and do the same thing. We access them. There's a whole bunch of different hooks, actually, just before I jump into the syntax. There's a hook section in the reference, so link to that's down in the description as well. And we've got in here sections on the state hook, the effect hook, building your own hooks, and there's a bunch more hooks that I'll be talking about later in this series. So I'll do a video on each one later on. Right now, use state. This is the one that we're going to do. So I'm going to I'll copy this and start with that. Jump back into our code. So this is how we use state with functional components. There is a method called useState. Now we need to import this inside of our component. So we'll say import useState from React. There we go. Red squiggle's gone. We've imported it. So now we're using this method that we've brought in from React. It takes one parameter. This can be an object, an array, a string, a boolean, a number, whatever you want, any kind of data, but this is the default. So I'm just going to change this to a string to show this is the default value for this property right here. So whatever this is, we would, in the previous version, this would be a property inside of state. So you do state.myprop. Now I can just treat it like any other variable. This method returns an array with two things. The first thing is going to populate this variable. The second thing will be the function that gets put inside of here. So we would call this something like set myprop. Whatever it is that we've used here. So myprop, that's my variable. Set myprop, this is the function that I would call to update myprop. Default value, so the starting value. I can use myprop anywhere inside my function, inside my component. So down here, if I were to create another paragraph here, I could do this. Now what I've done is I've put that variable, I've embedded the value of that variable, myprop, from here. We jump back in. There it is, default value. So this is the state value. And if we look inside of our components in the React Dev Tools, inside search bar, that's our component here, we have a section called hooks. And there's going to be a numbered list of things called state that we can refer to. So this first one is my prop, and it's got this default value. The set my prop, this is a method that I can use inside of these functions right here. So on submit, we could say set my prop. There's my method. And what do I want to put inside of here? Let's say hello. So I'm going to, when the person submits the form, I'm going to replace default value with hello. I type something, I submit the form. This is changed to hello. We can see down here that it changed the value of my prop to hello. That means we've changed state, and that is a trigger to re-render our component. So the fact that we clicked the submit button meant that we changed this value, and React knew because that value changed, it needed to re-render this. And that's what the useState does. It allows us to hold on to values through multiple re-renderings of the component. And we have a method that we use to update it. The reason we use a method is if I just did something like this. Let's go inside of here. Instead of set my prop, if I just said my prop equals hello, okay, I'm changing the value of this property. Let's render this, refresh. There we go. Type something, and I'm going to submit. Here we go. It's going to fail. I'm not allowed to, because this was a const, I can't reassign it. So you think, okay, well, fine, I'll change this to let. Not a great practice, but we can do it. Nothing happens. So it's not that it fails anymore because we said let, it's allowed to reassign to the value, but there's nothing watching to see if it happens. That's the whole point of having this method is it knows that it's changed the value. It can look at the old value, look at the new value, and if it's changed, it can tell React, so React knows that it needs to re-render things. Okay, so we have that working. When I submit, let's put this back to const as well. When I submit my form, it's going to call this set my prop method, and it's going to update it. Now, I don't want to write the word hello. I don't want to have something hard-coded in there. What I want to do is I want to actually take the value from the form and put that into the property. So we'll get rid of this and replace it with ev.target. For the submit, that means it's our form. The form is the target. And if you remember from the last video when we were building this, I was saying that we were going to use name, not ID. Another one of the reasons why name is beneficial for us, we don't have to try and do query selector to an ID or anything like that. Form elements have something, have an array that they can use to access all the elements in the form with their name property. So keyword, I can use that up here. That's the name for the input, and then I get its value. So whatever they've typed up until this point, that is going to replace my prop. And it's going to do it using this method, which means React knows about it, and React will update this. So I'm going to say hello. It updates it. Goodbye. It updates it. Okay, great. So that's working. That has bound state to our component. Now, this state property that we've created here, it's attached to this component, which is fine. If this is the only place I'm going to use it, and that's really the idea behind state, is you have things that relate to that component that you use inside there. What if, however, I wanted to take that value and use it someplace else inside of my application? If that's the case, we have to do a thing called lifting state, where we take the state properties and put them inside of a component that's higher up in the hierarchy that can see all the components that are going to share these values. And we use props to pass them down. Now, I'm going to change the label that I used here, the variable name, because myProp and setMyProp aren't very useful. And default value, I'm going to change that to an empty string. SetMyProp and myProp, I'm going to call this term and setTerm. So this is the search term that I'm talking about here. So we'll say setTerm. This is going to be the same, and I go down inside of here where I was using it. Change that to term. Okay. And right now what's happened is there's actually an empty component here, an empty paragraph. If we look inside the elements, inside of our section search bar. So there's the paragraph. It has no content in it, but there is the paragraph there. If I want to change that, if I don't want to render the paragraph if there's no content, we can use the fact that we have this term to decide whether or not we're going to render it. The default value is an empty string. An empty string in JavaScript is a falsy value. So if I did a ternary operator right here, instead of putting the paragraph around this thing, I'm going to say this, ternary operator. If term is true, then what I want to render is a paragraph. And inside the paragraph, I'm going to say you searched for, and I will put my variable inside there. If it's false, it's going to be an empty string. So if term exists, I'm going to create the paragraph and I'm going to say you search for with whatever the term is. If it's empty, I'm rendering nothing. I'll jump back to components so we can see this. Here, let's refresh so we get them. There we go. There's search bar. Props, there's nothing. Hooks, there's one value. It's an empty string, but because it's empty, it means that we don't have in the elements that paragraph. If we drill down here, section, there's the form. There is no paragraph inside of here. If I start typing something, there, now it says what I searched for. And next time I do something, it's doing this. It's updating this every time I change it. All right, now moving on to the little bit more complex. What if I want to use this value someplace else? So I'm going to have a search history where I'm going to display a list of all the things that I've searched for so far. Inside of here, we've got our search bar component in our components folder. I'm going to create a new one called search history. So I'll create a new folder called search history. I'm going to add the search history.js and a search history CSS. There we are, we have that. I'm not going to bother putting anything in the search history CSS right now, but we'll import it. So import search history CSS, and I'm going to export default function. Misspelled function. All right, it's going to have a return, and inside the return, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a UL, and inside of it will be a bunch of list items. So we'll get to that part where we actually build the list of search terms. All right, back up to app. Inside of app, we're going to add our search history. Okay, so we have our other component. There's my empty list item. This is where it's going to appear. Now I need to get the value that I created here, that I'm using here. Whenever I update this, I want it to be updated here as well. So what I'm going to do, instead of trying to, in here, push this up because it's state. This is state. State belongs to the component. I can't push that state up to a higher level. I need to actually create the state at a higher level. So, props, we're going to pass down what the current value, this default value, we're going to have that inside of props. We're going to pass down props. So down here, this term, let's say props.term. We're going to extract from props the string term. That's going to be our default value, which means I'm not going to be using this, and I'm not going to be using this. I'm going to rely on my parent element to give me a search term. I'll do that. Okay, so I'm not now passing any values up. I will be doing that inside of here. I want to be able to pass the value when they submit. I need to take a string and send it up to the app, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. So we've kind of gone backwards. We've removed the state that was bound to the search bar, and we're now relying on something being passed in through props. Over here in search bar, I'm going to create something called term. And I'll just start with that, just so something is being passed in. So we'll save both. So now we're passing in something called term, and there we go. You searched for default. There it is. There's the value coming through the props. All right, so that's step one. That's working. Now I want to add in here, we've got the import for our search history. I'm going to add useState here. There we go. I've got useState, which means I can use it here. And if I think about this, what's the easiest way for me to organize this data? Well, search history is going to be a list of names where either the first or the last, depending on how I want to organize this, will be the last thing that was searched for. So we'll create something called terms, which will be our array, and set terms. And this is the naming convention that it follows. The methods that you use to update this should be set and then something like what we have here. So we have that, and then we will call useState. And what is going to be the default value? If this is an array, that's what I'll put in here, an empty array. So we have useState being used. We're creating terms as an empty array. In search history, I'm going to pass that in. I'm going to pass my terms array. Whatever terms is, that's what's being sent down to search history. And if you remember a couple of videos ago, we talked about how to take an array and build things from that. We've got props.terms. Right here, there's our prop. It's called terms. So props.terms is what we're going to use right here. I'll get rid of my li, and I'll put my expression inside of here. We want to take props.terms, that's the array, and we will map through it. For each term, I want to generate that list item. So li, and because it's a bunch of things, because we're mapping, we need to have a key. And I'll take the term and use that as the key. And I'll also use the term as the text that I'm displaying inside my list item. So props has terms. It's an array. We're going to map through it and generate those. Now it's an empty array right now, so we're not seeing anything. Let's put something in the default here. So we're going to pass that through as the first string, so we should get that showing up. If I put 2, like this, there should be 2 things showing up, because we're passing terms down here, and the starting value is an array with these 2 things. There we go. New Hope and Empire, so that works. What about this? What are we going to put inside of here? So term is going to be the first value from terms. Now, It is possible there's nothing in there, but for the moment, I'll just say terms number 0. Just whatever the first thing is. Start with that. So number 0 is New Hope, and there we have New Hope was passed down and displayed there. Okay, so whatever the first thing is, that's what we're going to put here. Now we've got to the problem of, well, how do I update this? Okay, if I create a function called addTerm, where I'm passing in a new term, what I want to do is I want to call setTerms. Now, remember, all these methods need to be used inside of our components. I can't call this function from someplace else. It has to be done inside this component. And, well, I can't just say term, because that's going to replace the old array with a single string. It needs to be an array that I've got here. Now, how do I want to organize this? Do I want to put the brand new thing at the beginning or at the end of the array? Depending on how I want to do it, I can just use destructuring like this, or the spread operator rather. So I'm going to create an array, which is the square brackets. I'm taking, oops, sorry, that should be terms. I'm taking this array and I'm splitting it apart into its individual pieces. And it's going to go here after whatever the other term was. So whatever the most recent thing that went in here, that's going to be at the beginning of the array, which means right here, number 0 is going to be the thing that was last passed in. Okay, and when this gets updated, when terms gets updated, this value gets updated, so it's passing down the updated value to search bar. Okay, so we have the functionality here in the top level, in the app component for building this. How do I now get search bar to call that? Well, the whole purpose of props is to be able to pass things down. And so far we've been passing strings or arrays and objects, things like that. But we can also pass down functions. In JavaScript, functions are just objects. So there we go. I'm going to pass to search bar a reference to my function right here through props.addTerm. That's going to be the function. Now inside of here, I have props.addTerm. So instead of the set term that I was using just to update it here, I'm going to call the function that's back up inside that app component. So we'll say I want to call props.addTerm. That function is the one that's up. It's the reference to the one that's up inside of app. Now I can pass the string, and it's going to be the same as what we had on the line above here. We've got ev.target is our form, and then keyword is the name, not the ID, of the form element. And we get its value. So when you submit, we're taking this value and we're passing it to this function, which just happens to be up here. It's going to take the term and add it to the beginning of the array to update this. So there was our default starting value. There was the one that we passed down. So it's like we've loaded the page or loaded it. We've used it a couple of times. We've put a couple of things into that array. And we can see in search bar, there's the function. And here's the default value. So we'll add a new one in here, Jedi, and I'll hit enter for a return to submit the form. This has been updated. So that was sent up to app, updated the state of terms inside of app, was pushed back to here as a prop, and it also passed a new value down to here. I want to add another one. And so on. So there we have it. We've got state that has been lifted up into a parent element so that it can be passed as props to the things down below. But the things down below are allowed to reference functions from the top level thing. And that's how we pass the values back up. And that is how we use the useState hook. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments. The link to the finished code for episode 6 branch of the repo is in the description as well as the link to the documentation for hooks. Hope you found that useful, and as always, thanks for watching.